security concepts. These are not a very difficult area. It's an area that people, anybody can be able to comprehend. So security concepts. So security can be looked from different perspectives, and basically we have got terms and terminologies that we need to understand when it comes to security. For example, threat, which is a possibility of a harmful event, something that can cause harm. So if there exists a threat, if something is a threat, it means it's something that can cause harm. And a threat is actualized by taking action. So, implementing an attack. An attack is usually done based on a certain vulnerability. So, for example, if we may use the current pandemic to explain these concepts. So coronavirus is a threat to human health. So, it's a threat. And if you don't take precaution, then, you become vulnerable. And so therefore, if you've not taken the precautions, you are vulnerable. And so therefore, you are subject to attack by this threat. So in matters networking, we can look at different perspectives. For example, here we have some examples of threats, physical damage. If the router, if the switch is loosely hanging on the rack, it is facing the threat of physical damage if it falls, right? Loss of essential services, loss of information, technical failure. So all these are threats that can be exposed by various vulnerabilities. So a vulnerability is a weakness that causes a target to be susceptible to attack. So failure of security camera, for example, in an ATM bank is a vulnerability that can be exploited by, by muggers. They mug you and they don't, because the CCTV cameras don't work there, so they direct you to that ATM to withdraw money. So, right? So that is a vulnerability. So, if your door doesn't close, that's a vulnerability. Thieves can, take advantage of that vulnerability to gain access to your house. Unpatched software is another vulnerability. If you look at it from that end, exploits. A tool or a technique that attacker can use to take advantage of vulnerability, right? It could be ransomware, it could be phishing, SQL injection, exploit, kits, whatever payload that could be used to subject or to actualize an attack, right? So usually, exploits is the action. It's the action of the tools that are that will be taken to exploit a vulnerability. Mitigation techniques refers to those action plans, action steps that you take to protect yourself from harm. Enable IT personnel to address threats, vulnerabilities, and exploits. Mitigation techniques. What do you need to do to ensure that there is footage? There is footage in that ATM lobby again. What do you need to, what mitigation techniques will you take after you have, you've been hit by a virus, and so on and so forth. So this will include protecting organization resources from different kinds of harm, like deploying security programs, deploying IAM systems or identity and access management. In our area here from CCNA, we are going to implement ACLs. to ensure that certain traffic does not go beyond a certain boundary. Security programs that can be initiated would include, for example, taking care of CIA, or implementing CIA in your organization, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And for example, we implement CIA through deploying encryption services, encryption solutions. Um, Whatever encryption solution, in terms of protocols or any other solution that you may have to your disposal. Integrity, we implement integrity through hashing, right? By implementing hashing mechanisms. We implement availability through high availability solutions like load balancing, like failover clustering, like backups, and so on and so forth. So common elements of ensuring that there is security in your organization is user education. User awareness is the most effective. Let people be aware that doing this or the other, clicking this or the other will cause harm. User awareness and training. Then from a technical perspective, then you can implement physical access to resources by implementing your ACLs, maybe Telnet, SSH, and all other solutions that may be relevant in your place. So user awareness may include, all manner of education, telling people what to do, maybe documented on the company policy and so on and so forth. And maybe including installing unauthorized devices. So because users will come with their own devices, especially in an environment of bring your own device. Users will come and just plug a device without knowing the implications to that, right? Downloading and installing malicious software, right? Using we call non-existent passwords, and so on and so forth. So we can also implement physical access control. Who has access to the building, who has access to the compound, who has access to the server room, who has access to that track, who has access to that switch, who has access to that firewall. And so you implement physical impediments. In our case here, we are going to implement a digital impediment using AAA. So AAA will be our main focus here. And AAA is authentication, authorization, and accounting. Authorization is a matter of who can log in, right? Who can log in, right? That's how we implement authentication. Who has the powers to log in? Once they log in, what can they do? Authorization. So usually, maybe from a routing switching perspective, especially for Telnet, SSH, or for logins, console or VTY, we can talk of privilege levels. So a user have got privilege level what? Then accounting. Accounting meaning that you can track back. You can track. Maybe you have got a logging mechanism whereby you are able to know who who gained access and what they do, right? So that is what AAA is for: authorization, authentication, authorization, and accounting. So we've looked at authentication, authorization, and that. So in our case, we shall be using two servers here, or two types of servers to implement, or not necessarily server, but services to implement AAA. And we shall be using Radius and Takas, or Takax. Takax is not very popular as radius is. So we have those two in our line of families. Radius being remote access dial-in user service. Remote access dial-in user service. TACAX is just TACAX or TACAX, whichever you want to call it. Terminal access controller access. It's visually very easy to remember those because the A stands for the same thing, access. Terminal access controller access. Then control systems. So TACAX was developed by Cisco and released as an open standard since 1993. So you'll see a number of a number of vendors with TACAX, but the industry standard is Radius, and that's what you are going to see across the board from Cisco to Huawei to Juniper to HP to Windows, and so on and so forth. So we are going to, in my case, I'm going to focus much on Radius. Then after that, we shall come to ACLs. So I'm sure we cannot run ACLs today. So ACLs are the main component of Cisco access control, and we shall look at ACLs before, and we shall explain what ACLs are for. So I will not touch much on ACLs here and what they do. I would like us to look at them when that time comes. The other way is implementing password or managing passwords. We can use different mechanisms to manage passwords. One, we can have a directory service, which will define your security policy. A formalized statement that defines how security will be implemented in an organization. Then part of the security policy might include or will include password policy, which dictates matters to do with the passwords. For example, password length, complexity, and lifetime of a password, and so on and so forth. So in our case, we'll not look at that. You can implement password policies by, you can have security, for example, password policies that specify what password manager, for example, is allowed in that organization. Is it LastPass? Is it OnePass? Is it what kind of password manager? Do you use even password managers in your case? So I want us to implement authentication. We are going to use, I'm going to implement or I'm going to showcase local authentication. Then we shall look at remote authentication. I'll not major much on the other types of authentication because we already did during, on our first week, we looked at common security, basic security implementations where we implemented, passwords or secrets, as we call them, for our VTY and console lines. So in this case, I'm going to focus on AAA authentication. So local passwords, password management, and anyway, let me just go into password management, and we'll be able to see how that works. So then we shall come to, if time allows, we shall look at layer 2 security, and in this case we shall look at port security and DHCP snooping or DHCP security. So most likely I'll not come to these slides again. I'll prefer us to work on these things other than me running or explaining about all these things. Then we shall come to ACLs, and once we implement ACLs, we shall be through with security. So I want us to go to our topology. So in this topology, I'm going to illustrate a number of things. One is that on this router, I'm going to illustrate local authentication. Then on this other router here, I'll illustrate radius. At your own time, you can implement TACAS here. So at your own time, maybe you can implement TACAS there. So, but in my case, I'll only, I will only demonstrate these two. Then, if time allows, we can look at, port security here. Then we shall also use the same. We shall use the same for. We shall use the same solution for ACLs. I think it is a good platform, and DHCP. In fact, let me implement a DHCP here, because I know my client here does not have an IP address, right? So doesn't have an IP address, doesn't have a valid IP address. So I want to implement DHCP here. So we've already seen how this works. So the default gateway will be 172.16.10.1. DNS is 172.16.10. I mean, it's actually 100.54. So they're supposed to be 100. And start IP, I can make it 11, for example. So then save, and I should expect that my client here will have, yes, it has gotten an IP address now, and we are good to go. The reason why I have implemented the DHCP is because for us to implement DHCP snooping, we need a DHCP in that environment. So I chose not to go for a router-based DHCP for convenience purposes. So let us start by looking at connection. So if I go to my PC here and maybe go to command line, and I try to ping my router 172.16.100.1, I can see it is reachable. But for example, if I try to telnet to it, you'll see that the connection is closed because I've not implemented, remote connection to this router. So that is what I want to do. And then once I come to this device, I'll see whether I'll be able to telnet. So let me go to this router here, and we implement telnetting, or we implement login, local, basically what I would call local access. All right. So in the previously we could have used or on week 1 we implemented local login, if you remember, like this. We went to, maybe I can do it in in Notepad here so that you can capture it. So enable configure terminal, and then we just went ahead and created a username. So let me say user name. Let me call him admin one, and a secret of maybe admin one for convenience purposes, right? Then once you do that, we go to line VTY, maybe 5 lines, or even console. And then we do login local, or we did login local. And that would be it. So if I copy this and paste it, on this device here, you can see if I exit, maybe show run section 9, you can see I have chosen to log in locally. The login have been tied to the local credentials. These local credentials that I have defined. So if I therefore go back to my PC here and try to telnet, you can see it's now asking for a username. So, and then I do maybe admin one, and then admin one. It is silent, so you have to be sure. But because I have not assigned any rights and permission, if I try to go to privileged mode, it doesn't. So I'll need to go back to line VTY 01, VTY 04, and then privilege level, maybe 5, 10, 15, whatever. So that is telnetting, but we have authenticated against a local username. That username is defined in this router. So which means if we are to implement telnetting or SSH for all these routers and switches that we have here, it would mean that we create this username and password on each and every device. And that is cumbersome. That is tedious. It is a lot of work, right? So why don't we just have a common repository then, right? Why don't we have just a common repository where we are going to log in to any of these devices using that common repository, all right? And then that is why then we need to implement AAAA, right? So what do we do? I would like us to go to the server, and basically I'm going to implement Radius. I would like we go to the server, and then on the area of AAAA, right? We go to that item, then we turn it on. We turn it on. Then we define the devices that we would like to access. So which devices do we want to implement AAA for? And what will be the usernames that will be used, right? And which server type do we want to implement? So in my case, it is a Radius. Otherwise, we can pick Takas as well. So let me just remain with the Radius. So for the client name, let me have router 1. What's the IP address of router 1? It is 172.16. dot 100.1. And I can key in the secret, or I can just leave it. Basically, what we call a key. meaning that you'll have to define that on the router as well. But okay, for convenience purposes, let me leave that out. I also have another router, which is router 2, that have 172 dot your network ni gani? It is dot 10, 16.10.2, and then add, and then I have another router 3, then 172.16.30, I mean dot 20.3, and that's it. So I now have my 3 routers defined. Then I can define username. So maybe username 1 is, let's say, okay, let me just use a generic one. Generic usernames for purposes, for purposes of training, so that I'm able to remember them well. So maybe admin 2. I'll not use admin 1 because we have already demonstrated use with it, so that we can get the difference. So then I just use a password of admin 2. Maybe I can add another user, admin 3. And then admin 3. Of course, in an organization, you use individual names. So, and our AAAA is live. It's up and running, right? So all we need now to do is to implement, radius to tell that router to do AAA, to do AAA maybe based on TACAs or on radius. So remember, if we want to implement TACAs, we will have to come to this server again and implement TACAs. We define, to use TACAs, but anyway, I don't want to do that. In fact, we can even have another server for curiosity purposes. For curiosity purposes, we can have another server here that performs TACAs. Maybe I can add it to the network as well. And I will configure it to get IP addresses dynamically. So it gets dot y. Yeah, dot 12. Of course, it is not a good practice to have servers with what do you call it? With the dynamic IP addresses, so it's not a best practice, but in our case, it's a learning curve, so we can do this, or we can afford to do that. So then we can just come here and specify that we want to do maybe TACAs. So when it is a matter of TACAs, it shall be coming to this server. When it's a matter of radius, to that server. But anyway, I'll not be doing TACAs. So let me just concentrate on this server here that we have radius anyway. So because we had already done local authentication here, let me do radius for our router 2 here. Right? So if I go to the client, let me just exit. If I ping 172.16.10.2, you can see that client can reach that router. Remember, we had already done routing, OSPF to be specific. But if I try, for example, to telnet 172.16.10.2, you see, can't connect because we have not defined those services in this router. And that is what I want us to do. Again, so that you can follow up on the command, let me just do them here. Right, so Usually, it is a good practice to define a local username just in case. Just in case the telnet is not working. Just in case that service is not running. You have a fallback plan, right? So you have a fallback account that you can use for administrative purposes. But I'm going to, just leave that alone. So I'm going to do and define radius server. You can see if I'm doing it, if I were to do it right here, yeah? Enable configure terminal. You can see we can have, we can either have radius server or we can have Takas server, right? And then beyond from there, you define a key. If we set a key, remember in our case, we did not define any key here, right? We did not define any key for our router. So we will also not be defining the key. All we shall do is to define the host, basically where it will be fetching IP, credentials from. Then we basically do the IP address. But remember, we are not doing Takas. We are doing we are doing radius server. So hosts, and then what is the IP address of our credential, our authentication server, our AAA server. It is 172.16.100.254, right? And once we do that, once we have defined our radius server, then we tell the router what it should do with the radius server, and it is to get credentials based on AAA. So we do AAA, then new model, so that we can get access to the most recent, the new model commands like AAA authentication. We can also do authorization or accounting. Then what do we want to do with authentication? To log in. For what purpose? We can specify a name. We can specify a name that we want our login. Our login. For example, login maybe my AAA is the name. So, for example, I want to give it my AAA or my radius, or because you can have my radius, you can have my Takas. There's just a name that you get out of the blues. So maybe I can call it my AAA. Then I want you to get this from a group of servers, and they are radius servers, not Takas servers. And then if the radius server doesn't, if the radius server fails, log in locally, right? Although we have not defined any local credentials anyway. So once we do that, once we have defined that, then we tell our router what it should do with these items. So what should it do with these credentials? It should use them for login. Login to what? Maybe line VTY 0 to 4. It could be line console 0, for your console ports. But in my case, I just want to simulate line VTY. Then you tell line VTY to log in for authentication, or to perform authentication logins based on my AAA, right? Based on that module that you have defined. Once you do that, you can now go to your PC and do telnetting. right? So let me see if I've made any errors. So the only reason why I am doing it off, off script is so that you are able to capture these that flow of commands. Let me see if it works. If we get errors, we will see them. Radius server. Okay, I made a pronunciation error. Radius server. So let me exit again and rerun it. This one is supposed to be one line. Labda sijui nilifanya nini. Yeah, like that. It's supposed to be one line. Yeah, now it has worked error free, right? So we've set a radius server, queried for AAA, configured our AAA scheme, and then tied line VTY for AAA. So that is what we have done. So, and we can do show run, and I want to go to specifically to the section of line configurations. So, and you can see line VTY00 is now, login is not, login is not local. It is now on a certain usernames. And remember, we have not defined any usernames here. So let us see if we try to telnet. Now that last time it failed, let's see if this time round it works. There we go. It asks for a username and password. So we have defined like 3 usernames. Were they 3 or 2? How many usernames? 2. Admin 2 and admin 3. So which username do we want to log in with? So maybe admin 2. Admin 2. And the password is admin. Like that. Okay. There, so you can see we have logged in. Of course, we cannot go to build that unless here you see here, unless we did maybe here we did privilege how do we type privilege level maybe 15 or 5, at least 3 and above. So that is what will enable us to go, that is what will enable us to manage that. So we can see from our PC, we have been able to telnet all the way to router 2, all the way. Of course, if you have not done proper routing, you will not be able to go beyond that. So you will need to have done so you need to ensure that you can basically routing is properly defined. All right, so that is telnetting. Any question that far? Any question?
Okay. No, just to be clear.
Yes.
Yeah. Is it really possible to define both radius and packets on the same server for various routers? I mean.
I've not seen on the same router. Okay, I get you. So for example, going to the same router. So for example, if you see here, do show run, do run. So you can see here, for example, what is defined is for radius, so that you have two lines for radius and for takas, you know, whichever works or whichever you want to implement. So all you need to do is allow me to just copy this, and I want to duplicate it. Let me draw in here for separation, and I'll do here. Um, I'll do here. Takat, and also you will need to tell it how it should behave with this. So maybe let me do this. Let me define it on a different page. So then you do tacax host the same, maybe or a different one. Do you want us to do for a different or? But packet tracer, I don't think it will allow us to do that. So maybe 100.12, right? If we come here and we do AA and we change to takas, so it's just that it will not be now. It will now not do radius. It will only do takas. So at packet tracer we cannot have both on the same server, but we can have a different server doing this. So maybe I can just come to this. I turn it on. I do router 2 172.100.12. I think that's the IP address it was given. And I'm going to do takas, then add. So the server type is takas. And something has caught me thinking. What if I do radius and add? Great. It can add, you can have both worlds in the same. I've never tried that. You can have both worlds in the same server. Which tells me then I can just come here and then do, maybe select that, then do takas and add. I hope I have, yes, it has added it. Then maybe select, maybe sort. Doesn't want to sort by, so let me take, okay, but we only need two. We only need two in our illustration. So having defined both, then we can now run this. This is 254. Copy. So do show run, and it has replaced that. Okay, let me do this. Let me rerun. Let me rerun this. Do show run. So it has returned it to radius. I also want to check the radius servers defined. So you can see here, it has both takas server and radius server. Because of these two lines. So I have a radius server and I have got a takas but they are pointing to the same IP address anyway. So those ones have been noted. So for these two to coexist, what I'm going to do, I'm going to change this name. I'm going to change it from my AAAA to my TACA. My TACAs. So maybe I should even have called this my radius, right? So that at least these can be retained as well. So do show run, and now I have the two options available. So this is for radius, and this is for TACAs. And if you go down further, you'll be able to see that the two servers are also defined. So meaning that if I come here, I'll be able to log in using whichever mechanism that is available, whether it is TACAs or it is whether it is. But of course, here you cannot specify exactly which one you want. All you need to do is to log in. So admin 2, and then like that. So otherwise, if we had defined the radius here and we defined TACAs here, of course we could have seen the difference, because I could have used maybe admin 4 here, so that we can now log in with TACAs. But by and large, going by your question, you can define both implementations on the same server. On the same router, both TACAs and radius. So maybe when you're implementing in your case, you can choose to call this my radius. And by the way, here we didn't complete this. Copy, paste. So if we want to have both worlds, I'm spelled for a choice. Okay, let me do this. Let me just come to this. My radius host is that, and it is also my TACAs server. Then a new model, a authentication login, my radius, group radius, and then another line. Okay. So another line for it, my authentication, my TACAs. Then this is like that. Then when it comes to this, you tie to both. So this is now what it would be, as a complete package. This is what it would be as a complete package. Both TACAs and both radius and TACAs defined in the same router. So maybe I can delete this, so that we only have one reference point. So that is what it would be. Supposing, for example, I do this on my, okay, I don't want to do this on router 3. I've got something else for router 3. Let me just overwrite whatever is here. And show run. Una venye imedefine mingi hapa. So I should actually do away with this line because I don't need it anymore. I have already defined this, but okay, no problem. Then going down to line, so my two servers are there, then line VTY. Okay, line VTY was only able to pick one, which is the second one. That's what I wanted to check. Login authentication, so enable configure terminal line VTY 04. Then let us see if I run radius and I run Takas. So run section line. Yeah, it's only able to hold one. So now there comes the problem. So when it comes to your VTYs, so you'll only be able to bind one of the schemes that you have, that you have. So maybe you can have one scheme for telnet. You can have another one for maybe SSH, another one for line console, because if I were to do line con 0 and then maybe run, this is the currently this is Takas, so I do radius, then maybe privilege level 15. Don't lock myself, and then do show 9. So you see now for line console, it's my radius. For VTY, it is Takas. So unless then you adopt that methodology. And guess what has happened? Now, if I try to exit, I'm prompted for a username. And what did I define for line con? I defined for radius, right? So maybe admin 3, admin 3. Yeah. So that's what you get out of this. So I was not to implement Takas, but I've ended up implementing it because of that question. But it's all good. It could also be. It could also be. It could also be. Of course, Telnet is a weak tunnel to use, so you are advised to avoid it. If as much as possible, because it doesn't encrypt communication. So what we are advised to use is to use SSH. So, for example, if from PC let me exit. If from this PC I try to SSH and then I use which user? Maybe admin 2 to the same router, 22.10.2, you say I'm not able to connect using SSH because I've not defined it. And by the way, you could be having a tool that that is installed on your, like Putty or any other tool that you may be using for SSHing. You could be using the typical CMD and so on and so forth. Just like here in Packet Tracer, we can use a CMD to try out all this, or we can use an installed application like this one that we have here. There's a tool here for Telnet and SSH client. In my case, I've been using CMD, which is no problem. So otherwise, if you get an application like this, you can either choose between Telnet or SSH. So if it is Telnet 172.16.10.2, which we have already configured, so it should work there. It asks for a username, admin2, admin2, and it works. However, what if it is what if it is Telnet? I mean SSH. So SSH 172.16.10.2 admin 2 connect. So there is nothing to connect to, because we have not defined SSH for our router. So what I want us to do is now to do the same, but for SSH. We prepare our router to do SSHing. So instead of doing that on router 2, allow me to do, because we have already done TACAS, so let me put those one here, and instead I do SSH connection here on router 3 here, right? So we implement SSH for router 3, and I know our router 3 is 172.16.20.3. Admin maybe 1, 2, I mean 2 or 3, because those are the only ones that are subject to AAA. So maybe 2 for consistency purposes. So we can't connect. So we'll need to go ahead and define SSH for this router of ours. So again, this is what we are going to do. Let me make my text bigger. So we need to define a domain name for our SSH, right? So enable configure terminal. Then we define SSH is not going to work if you don't define a domain name. So domain name, and then you can come up with a domain name. Let me call it Johnny.local. Right? Then we specify our crypto generation as crypto key. I like doing this on the router itself. Crypto key generate, and I use RSA. Then after that, kutoka hapo siwezi enda beyond that unless I don't want to do crypto key generation, or I want to use the default. If I want to use the default of 512 bits, then I can just go ahead and run the command from this. Otherwise, okay, maybe I'll come back here and complete this, but let me just do this from the router. Because so that you get it. So there you go. So once we run crypto key generate, you see it asks us for how many bits. The default is 512, right? So I'll do 1024 or any other value in the range of 360 and 240, I guess. 2040 that is. So like that. So you can see now SSH have been enabled. So I can define, for example, the SSH version. So IP SSH version 2, like that, and that's it. So beyond here is now our AAA mechanism. So these are the two options that I wanted to be sure of from our notepad here. So there we did 2024, and then we did version 2 there. Then beyond there is just the usual stuff. AAA, new model, and then AA authentication. By the way, we have already been doing authentication. You can use all the others, authorization and accounting. So AA authentication, that's correctly spelled. Then login. Let me call it my SSH for so that we are able to distinguish it. So otherwise, if it fails, revert to the local. Once we do that, we define where we want this to apply, line VTY 04 maybe, or even line console 0, yeah. So for line VTY, or for our teletype, we tie it to my SSH. So login, authentication, then my SSH, right? So I can do the same for line console, right? So this will ensure now that AAA performs remote administration or remote authentication using SSH, which is a secure shell. It's more, it's better. It's more, it offers more protection. I can also go ahead and specify, for example, a new feature here, transport. So SSH should be available to what? Transport input SSH. So let me get this as well and run it here. So those are the scripts that you need for your SSH to run that. So, and that's it. So that's it. So we had done up to here. So I'll only copy this and run it on my router. Cross your fingers. Ooh. Transport input SSH login authentication. Okay. Line console 0 imekata. So let me see. Line console 0, and then transport. Oh, in output. Okay, output. Maybe all SSH. Only allow SSH. Basically, that's what it means. Only allow SSH connection. Right. So if I do show run section line. So line console 0 tied to SSH, VTY tied to SSH. So if I now try to connect using maybe admin 2, admin 3, sorry, the IP address is of my device is 172.16.20.3. then admin 2 or 3. Let me use 3 this time around. Connect, it asks for a password. So admin 3, enter. Invalid. Why? Admin 3, enter. Why? Admin 3. I might use another. Let me use another account. I hope this is still radius. Admin 3. Okay. 172.16.20.3. Why? Okay, let me do it from command line and see how it works. And is it kwa nini inang'asia? Oh, I don't have. I did. Oh, do I? Is it? Oh yeah, it's here. I was wondering why router 3 is not available. So that's done. So router 3 20.3. Am I router C 20.3? Sure. It's 20. Admin 4. Admin at 20. For whatever reason, I may need to check out why it is. But at least you can see it is able to reach uh, that router. So 172.16.20.3 for connect in at a I may need to find out where the problem is. Um, uh, Whatever the case may be. Let me do we should run authentication login my SSH local. Okay. Mhm. Mm, uh-huh. Gianni dot 172 dot 100.254. Mhm. One more try. Not yet Uhuru. Kuna kitu kingine mahali I needed to look at. This should be group. What? Group. Let me see it all. Bado. Bado. Anyway, it might take our whole afternoon here. One, two, okay. I may need to continue troubleshooting until it works. Otherwise, I don't think we'll be able to cover any more ground beyond that. So uh, we can drop, a at that, so that on Monday, once we come, we look at or we shall look at we shall use the same topology. So you can save your settings. So what we shall do is we shall look at port security, know how to protect these interfaces, and we shall also look at DHCP protection, as we already defined a DHCP here. So same topology, um, but we can do away with this router. I mean that server there. We don't need it. So that is what we shall look into. And for these commands of mine that I created here, I can copy them here so that I can be able to look into them as I troubleshoot, remembering that I have changed this to login authentication. Where's now here? Login. Then group radius, that, so that I'm able to follow through as I run my my troubleshooting. So otherwise, we drop at that. We meet on Monday to conclude on security. Any question? Okay then.
Just go and try and find out where the problem is coming from.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. So we meet on Monday.
Okay. Thank you.
Welcome.